Okay, so without further ado, we are bringing on our guest for today. We have Jeffrey Clayton joining us. He's the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. Welcome to the show. Glad we can sit down here and chat for a bit.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because I've had one previous attorney that's come on the show. We talked about the issues with the cash bail system in different places eliminating it, and I've heard some horror stories when it comes to all of that. Just briefly on an overall perspective, what's your concern with the current trend of what's going on specifically with this issue?
Well, about 15 years ago when this issue got hot, really it was a question of the rich gangsters were getting out, and we didn't like that. So we had to expand policies of preventative detention to stop that. And then that morphed into, we don't like people having to stay in jail because they can't afford bail. And so that morphed into the current movement, which is finding new ways to increase the number of people that are released and to increase the number of people that are released without having to post security or make assurances to the court that they'll return to court.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because it seems like with a lot of the issues that we have in the country today, it seems like we're always going for like the lowest common denominator. It's like instead of figuring out how to make it to where it's not just the rich people that are taking advantage of it, it's let's just open it up to everybody. Everybody can get out of prison. And it's like is that really the best strategy? And it's interesting that seems to be the takeaway that everybody's trying to implement from a governmental standpoint.
Yeah, we call it mashed potato criminal justice policy, where we take a political concept and then we try to mash it into the law, and the judges have to deal with it. And that's why you have judges in New York comparing it to walking through a Grateful Dead song, trying to apply the New York bail reform law because they can't figure it out. And what is the big problem that we have? Hard progress or progress is made by doing hard things, not the easy things, and that's especially true in the criminal justice system.
Oh yeah, for sure. There was a ruling, out in Illinois by the Illinois Supreme Court dealing with cash bail and eliminating it and all that kind of stuff. Can you kind of run down quickly what that case was really all about, so that way people have good context for that?
Yeah, under American law, there's two ways you stay in jail. The government seeks detention, or you don't post your bail. Traditionally, the government seeking detention has been a very limited concept in terms of what we allow prosecutors to do. That's expanding. So if we got rid of bail, we would either release you or the prosecutor would seek detention. And that's the system that we've gone to in Illinois. So the question everybody wants to ask is, what was the detention net then or today? And what is the detention net going to be tomorrow? In other words, what conduct gets out for free and there's no possibility of detention, and what conduct can the prosecutor file detention for? And so in Illinois, what we've done is we've gotten rid of the constitutional doctrine of a case-by-case basis and judges saying he's going to show up, he's not, and we have bails, and that's going to be the detention net. And the legislature has said, this is our detention net, and it's based on the crime the prosecutor alleges against you. That will determine whether you're in or out, with some exceptions. We can get into those.
Yeah. So when we're talking about this, let's deal with like what kind of crimes are we talking about here? Because I think for a lot of people, and in different parts of the country, I'm sure there's going to be different standards and different crimes have different punishments and things like that. But when we're talking about some of the concerns with people getting out of jail and people getting out of detention, without even bail or securities or anything like that, what kind of crimes are we talking about? Are we just talking about like petty little crimes? Are we talking about serious violent crimes? What are we talking about here?
We're talking about serious crimes, and I got the list from the prosecutors, and I'll give you a few examples.
Mm-hmm.
Theft of firearms under Illinois law. If you steal 5 firearms, prosecutor cannot seek to detain you. If you steal 6, he can. And that doesn't mean they're going to get detention. That's just eligibility. Another example is burglary. If you use a weapon to invade somebody's home to commit a felony, but you don't injure them, then there's no possibility of detention. My other favorite is, theft. There's no theft charges in any amount, whether it's a felony or misdemeanor, that will be detainable under Illinois law. So we could back up a U-Haul truck to the Home Depot, fill it with goods, and drive away. And we'll be out to do it again. And of course, there's an exception for the exact same conduct, and there'll be an argument over that, whether I rent a Ryder truck and take it to Lowe's, etc. But on the whole, these are the types of crimes that we're talking about. Also, assault of a developmentally disabled person. You would think, oh, of course that's detainable. No, only if you cause grave bodily injury. Fourth, driving under the influence aggravated of a school bus. Detainable if kids on board. Kids not on board, not detainable. So regardless of whether you're driving around school grounds. So what we're talking about is what judges would think about as detainable or not versus what the legislature is going to do based solely on the charge and no other facts. And that's the scenario we're getting in Illinois. And that's a scary thing regardless of where you come down on this because it's like, putting 5 dice in a shaker and shaking it out and seeing where things end up.
Oh yeah, yeah, oh yeah, definitely. So with this, so is there going to be a conflict between the legislature and the judicial side of things when it comes to all of when it comes to all of this, or am I not understanding that right?
Well, the Supreme Court basically said that the legislature has unlimited power. Other
Okay,
states have similar doctrines that say, hey, you can only deny bail in this set of cases. The Illinois legislature has just eliminated bail altogether and said, instead, we're going to have detention, and here's the list. And the Supreme Court let them get away with it and say,
gotcha.
yes, you can do this. When Chris Christie was reforming the New Jersey system to get rid of bail, even then, Justice Rabner and he said, we can't overcome this constitutional provision. That didn't stop the Illinois Supreme Court. So now the Illinois legislature can do whatever it wants. It can say, you steal 2 packs of gum, you're going to detention, or you have to kill 2 people before you go to detention. And that is going to be a constant and consistent political struggle in Illinois until they basically fix the Constitution, until the Illinois Supreme Court, it means what it says.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and it seems to be that if we're going down this route, to me it can be rife with corruption and rife with politicization and just everything because there's not like when you're actually dealing with this. I mean, obviously one of the things that we're dealing with out here in California is like criminals. They're just getting released. They're not even getting prosecuted, let alone let it out on bail and things along those lines. And it seems like that seems to be the trend that's happening around the country, where it's like the governments will go around and they say, well this group of people is being targeted, so we're going to figure out what crimes they're committing the most, and then we'll figure out either let's get rid of bail, let's not prosecute if it's under this amount of money. It seems like this is the trend that we're going, and at the same time it seems like crime rates are skyrocketing, and it's like people aren't putting two and two together to figure out that maybe there's some cause and correlation here.
It's bad line drawing. Let's call it what it is. And why is it bad line drawing? Because recidivists get away with it. And that's the number one game we got going right now, is people doing it 5 and 10 times. There was like an offender who appeared before a judge in New York on his 135th arrest. And there was a reporter in the room, and as he was walking out, the reporter said, well, you got out again for free. What would you like to say about that? And he said, I'd like to thank the Democrats in Albany for this bail reform. It's lit. And that's what we're talking about. These are the people that take advantage. It's, of course, everybody wants to protect the poor and the people that can't afford their bail and the people that are innocent. But that's not what we're talking about. People who can't afford their bail in general have 10 prior strikes, combination of prior convictions, and they didn't show up in court. So this is not innocent, completely innocent, like a little cat, like a kitten innocent. The presumption of innocence doesn't extend to extinguished conduct you already engaged in. And those lists are extensive. So the problem with this line drawing is, yes, maybe it does help a few people, but at what expense? And the expense is too great because recidivists have gotten wind of it, and look at what they're doing to our communities right now.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I'm out here in communist California, and so we deal with a lot of craziness out here, and it seems like when specifically when it comes to crime, the argumentation that I keep hearing from all of my lefty friends and the Democrat Party that's in charge is like it's these poor innocent people that don't have the money to defend themselves, and it's almost like they're always implying that they're being wrongfully accused and that the justice system is corrupt and there's nothing they can do about it, so they're being persecuted and losing their jobs because they're in prison wrongfully, and they're playing this kind of sob story, it feels like, over and over and over again. But I feel like every time I talk to law enforcement officers or prosecutors or things along those lines, they're like, no, like a lot in the vast majority of these cases, these are criminals that we're trying to go through this process, and if they get released or they get out without bail or anything along those lines, like they're actually a threat to a lot of the people around them.
Yeah, and I do feel sorry for people that unfortunately get ensnared in the system. But that argument wilts away on conviction number 3. That argument wilts away on arrest number 5. That argument begins to wilt over time. And so I'm sympathetic to that. But guess what? We say this in California all the time. You've already done the reforms. You've skimmed off the innocent. You've put in all the procedures in place. You've had the best public defenders ever. And I debated the public defender of San Francisco on the radio, and he claimed he's better than any defense lawyer in California. So they've done everything they can do to protect fundamental rights. And we need to do more. There still are racial disparities, when people are going through the system. I agree with that. But no, the criminal justice system is built to Define what the crime is illegal and punish the offenders. And the reason for that is to deter crime. People have to know that there's consequences. Two things deter crime: certainty of getting caught, swiftness of punishment. The all policy solution should look through that lens and look at what we're doing in California. Is there swiftness of punishment? Is there certainty of getting caught? There's certainty of nothing, really, and the criminals know. And so they're rolling the dice that, one, they're going to get caught in the first place, and two, that they're going to get prosecuted, and three, if they do, that they're going to be found guilty. And that's a low odds proposition. So they're riding even money right now, and we need to increase their odds to 20-1. And that's what we need to do, is focus on recidivists.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, dealing specifically with this cash bail, issue. From your perspective, what's your dream scenario of what would be the ideal thing to be implemented that would help to either deter crime, make sure that we're keeping criminals in prison. It's not just rich versus poor about who's getting in and who's getting out and all that kind of stuff. What's the ideal scenario that seems most fair across the board?
Well, I'd like to see judges being able to handle this, to highlight recidivist defendants and recognize that prior conduct is the best predictor of future failure, and to impose appropriate bails related to that, which would then result in those with multiple cases being held in jail and those on high-level offenses who have lengthy pasts or are high risk being held in jail. That's what you would hope for. But instead, what I look to is things like legislation that was run in Texas several years ago to combat what was happening in Harris County, where you had 0 people out on 8 or more multiple felony bonds, and all of a sudden we had a population of 30 or 40 people out on 8 or more multiple felony bonds at one time. So what did we said? We said, judges, listen, no free passes after they're out on 1 felony bond. You got to impose something on them, whether it's a non-monetary condition, you got to put them on house arrest, make them post a bail. You can't have multiple felony offenders continuing to offend while they're already out on felony charges. So I think that's the number one thing we have to focus on. And if I had my druthers, the number one thing we would focus on in this country would be illegal gun charges. To have an Illinois law say you can steal 5 guns and that's no problem. Well, how does anybody have any credibility on any gun regulation or anything if we say that's okay? They don't. And we have to focus on multiple time gun offenders, like in my hometown of Denver, Colorado, that are getting out on a $1 bond. Which is a federal charge. They're not referring it to the feds. They're charging him with illegal gun possession of a prior felon, giving him a $1 bond. Come on, people. We have to do something about that. So that's what I would do, is have no free passes for multiple time offenders and high risk offenders that we can highlight.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting as you're describing the repeat gun offenders thing, because it's like you see the Democrats, and obviously their whole entire platform really is let's limit guns, let's prosecute these guys, we got to get rid of as many guns as we can. But then when you're coming to these repeat gun offenders, it's like, no, we're just gonna release them back out into the population, $1 bail. Like at a certain point, you start getting down to, do you guys actually believe the crap that you're saying, or is there something more sinister going on? And this is where sometimes I put on my tinfoil conspiracy hat on, and I'm like, do you guys want these guys out there so that way you guys can push more legislation? And I always hate projecting motivations onto people, but also at the same time, I don't know what other conclusion you come to if that's what they're doing, while at the same time running this anti-Second Amendment charge.
A democratically elected prosecutor in a major city would have a lot more credibility if they came to the table and said, folks, I can't do bail on low-level offenses because I'm so busy prosecuting these gun criminals, and the jails are so full that we just don't have time for it. And that's not what we hear. And that's what we'd like to hear. That's what we need to hear. And that's what everybody needs to hear. Come on. If you're pulling a gun on somebody, that's a big deal, anywhere. And, in my little rural community out here, if you pull a gun on somebody, you're probably going down. But that's a different story. And you probably are on the south side of Chicago, too. But that's not the system we want here. And
Right.
So, yeah, like I said, you got to enforce those laws and the gun laws on all the way around. Otherwise, you have no credibility.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too. It's like, again, for me out here in California, it's been really interesting watching the crime rates changing over the years. And obviously the easy one that everybody always points to is San Francisco, but it's been really interesting the last couple of years. Los Angeles, I would argue, is more dangerous than San Francisco. I feel more safe walking around San Francisco than I do Los Angeles anymore, because the crime is so out of control. In San Francisco, obviously you deal with crime, but a lot of it is typically either druggies, or there's like theft of breaking into cars, breaking into garages, things along those lines. But in like Beverly Hills, there's actually an Instagram account called, what is it? I want to say it's like Street People of Beverly Hills or something like that. And they're just, all they do is document all the crime. It's violent crime. And these people are going in and they're breaking into stores, they're mugging people, holding people at gunpoint, carjacking. And it's like the police don't do anything to a certain degree. And you're seeing this play out, and it's getting progressively worse. And then people are like, why is crime out of control? What's happening? Well, maybe it's these policies that are being implemented by the district attorneys and the state legislatures and things along those lines that are pushing this and making people feel emboldened to commit these crimes. And I don't know why people are not putting two and two together with this.
No, these are not and they may be the destitute, kids of single moms from neighborhoods we want to protect, but by and large, they're not. They're jerks, and we need to go after them. I'm sorry. And if you're going to pull a gun on somebody, you're going to prison. And if people realize that, they're not going to do it. And unfortunately, we have to police the human organism. We cannot rely on people's goodwill. We cannot rely on the fact that people are just going to get it, because they aren't. And really, it comes down to violent crime and guns, as I said. When you cross a line, there has to be immediate, swift consequences. And if there's not, it's going to embolden crime. Everybody knows they can get away with it now, and look what's going on.
Oh yeah. It's interesting even seeing some of the crimes on literally on Rodeo Drive in the middle of Beverly Hills. They'll go in and with a crowd of 20 people, because the rule is technically they're not really going to go after you unless you steal at least $950 worth of merchandise. They'll sit there with their iPhone. Again, this isn't poor random little people. They're sitting with their $1,000 iPhone and the calculator calculating how much each individual person is stealing, so that way they can keep under that $950 mark. And then there's also more crime going on just outside of Beverly Hills as well, where there's this actual crime syndicate where they're actually going in, shutting down people's Wi-Fi so that way their Ring cameras are not capturing them, going in and just ransacking the place. They have no way of catching them because they're not caught on camera anymore. It's crazy the kind of organized crime that's going on. This is not low-level petty pickpocketing or something like that. This is high-level crime, and I feel like they feel completely emboldened because our DAs and district attorneys and attorneys generals out here are not actually doing anything about it.
It's highly organized. One of our contractors was at a neighborhood meeting where the Sacramento sheriff had to show up, and luckily did show up because he was so concerned, because there's an organized safe theft ring going around in Sacramento, and they don't care about the alarms because they're in and out before the police can get there. They're so fast with their saws and their ability to pull it out of the wall. Boom, 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 it's gone before anybody gets there. And they've, it's so organized. They know when people are not home. They've scouted it out. They know when they're on vacation. They've got this all figured out. This is organized crime. This is not little Johnny's gone wrong and the police are too hard on them. Sure, there's all that goes on, but this is not what we're talking about these days. This is a whole new generation and wave of crime that uses technology, that uses all kinds of things, and they are organized criminals because they think, oh, Barney Fife's down at the station houses and he gonna get me? Probably not. Probably not. They don't even know who Barney Fife is. They just think there's that level of incompetence.
Oh yeah, exactly. I can guarantee you that they did not watch the Andy Griffith Show growing up. But for me, what's interesting is seeing the crime rates go, and especially this violent crime and this organized theft and crime and things along those lines. But what's actually contributing to this? Is it just simply the fact that there's the same number of criminals, but they're actually performing more crimes because they feel emboldened, or is the criminal rate and the actual number of criminals expanding because of all of this? Like how do we decipher what's actually going on here?
I think a lot of it's policies. I mean, I watched the Speaker of the House fly into a meeting to explain to an activist that your advocacy of sort of soft on crime, really dumb on crime policies is the reason we got here. And I think that's right. We didn't look through the lens of criminal deterrence and keeping the peace, which is the whole point of the criminal justice system. When we got too far on this, we just need to dismantle the criminal justice system. We have mass incarceration. We need to do something about that. Sure, we do. Do we need to do something about that? We do. And really, that comes from sentence length. It doesn't come from stopping to enforce the law. And so that's really, what we're talking about is there's an opportunity to do everything here. But these policies, and I'll give you another example, is James Quinn, who published for the Manhattan Institute, basically said, we undid 27 years of crime reduction policies in New York City in 2 years. And it was because of these policies. We couldn't undo 27 years of success that quickly without making dramatic policy shifts, which happened. And you can see the result. And it wasn't bail reform. I mean, bail reform is a small component of a larger system of the breakdown of criminal deterrence and emboldening criminal behavior and emboldening and sending an economic signal to criminals to crime commit and get away with it. You know, I talked to the Home Depot lobbyists. Largest theft of Home Depot merchandise is their own employees. So you go, that's even another problem that they're fighting. And so people get away with it, and we're sending the signal as a society that we don't care anymore, that insurance will cover it. And
Yeah.
look where we are.
Right. Well, yeah. That one's been really interesting for me because I remember even during the Black Lives Matter, riots that were happening, and it's so weird that this is the mentality that we have right now in the United States. But so many people are like it's okay. They're going out there, they're rioting, they're protesting because of injustices, and all those business owners, they've got insurance. It'll cover it and all that. Well, yeah. But number one, their insurance their insurance rates are going to rise dramatically. Number two, a lot of them actually don't have insurance that covers for terrorist activity, which includes riots and things along those lines. And number three, I can't tell you how many business owners that I personally know in San Francisco that now, after all the crime, after the BLM riots and all that kind of stuff, their insurance now say, we won't cover you in San Francisco, we won't cover you in Los Angeles, and now they're either have to decide, do we keep our business open without insurance, or do we shutter altogether? And that's to me is this direct result of this mentality of, oh, they've got insurance, it'll cover it. Well, yeah, maybe for Target, maybe for Walmart, maybe for the big box stores, they're not going to lose their insurance. But these mom and pop shops, they're going to lose their insurance really fast.
And all of the impacts of crime are more aggressive on the poor. Everything we talk about. From, you get your car stolen, you can't go to work. Well, the rich guy takes, an Uber Black to work. Everything we talk about. And the other issue is food deserts. We talk about this whole thing that the nice stores don't want to go in the bad neighborhoods. Well, now we're on a roll. One of our contractors in Sacramento walked into Target and said, "Hey, manager, tell you what, I give you my credit card, you give me the key, and that way I can go shopping because everything I want is behind glass."
Mm-hmm.
And that's the world that we've gotten into right now. And it's gotten pretty ridiculous. But the bottom line is the impact of all these policies hits the poor harder. All the insurance costs and all that contributes to inflation. Who does that hit the worst? The poor. So every time a criminal commits a crime that increases prices or has an impact, it hurts the poor more than it hurts the rich. So we're really hurting the people that we're purportedly trying to help by allowing this crime wave to happen.
Yeah, well, and it also seems like the way that the Democrats will oftentimes frame this is they're focusing on the poor criminals being the victims, as opposed to the poor victims of the criminals being the victims. And I think it's this kind of backwards mentality. And I would argue that this kind of mentality, to a certain degree, and I've had a lot of different Black conservatives talking about this, that this kind of mentality in and of itself is racist, because what it's doing is it's directly harming a lot of these people in these inner city communities that you take the police out, you defund the police, you limit the amount of police that are actually out patrolling. What it's doing is, like you're saying, it's emboldening the criminals, and all it's doing is it's harming innocent poor people that are living in these communities, which in LA, in San Francisco, oftentimes are minorities. At what point, if we're looking at the direct result of who's being targeted the most, are we just going to say, look, these policies in and of themselves are racist?
Yeah, and a recent poll found 2/3 of Americans want, quote, low-level laws enforced by the police, which includes basic low-level theft. So the public realizes that these, quote, quality of life crimes have a major quality of life impact on them, and they don't like it. Also, as James Quinn's research showed, that these policies are causing further racial disparity increases amongst victims. In other words, the disenfranchised element of society that we seek to protect are becoming, at an increasingly higher rate, victims of crime. And so it's causing the exact opposite of what we want, which is everybody deserves safe communities. But by and large, where do minority communities live? In urban centers where we're allowing this to take place. And that is, I'm not going to use the racist word, no. But the bottom line is we have to protect those people. And it's our job as a criminal justice system to do that. And if people are okay with it, that's one thing. But I think the public is saying now, we're tired of it. Of course, 75% of Americans are against ending bail right now, and we still hear this in state legislatures. So the legislatures and the judges need to start listening to the public a little bit, and I think that'll help ease this crime wave as well.
Yeah. Now, what do we do with the justice system in general, in the sense of, the argument that we're constantly hearing from a lot of the politicians and a lot of the people in the mainstream media is that the justice system is corrupt. It targets minorities. It's because they look at the proportion of African Americans and people and minorities in prison compared to white people, and they run all these numbers and all these statistics. From your perspective, is the justice system targeting these minority people at a different rate than it would somebody that might find themselves to be white, or is there something else going on from your perspective?
Well, I think the criminal justice system certainly has been used as a tool of Jim Crow, particularly in the last century, and there's legacies of that in certain jurisdictions that still exist today. So why, I don't want to deny that it's not at times used as a tool. However, that's an incomplete picture. I think really, maybe this criminal justice system isn't doing the best job it can, and of course we need to reduce racial disparities amongst similarly situated people. But the complete picture would be to look at the victims of crime. Using the FBI crime reports, because you cannot, BS that, right? If somebody called in and reported a crime, then we need to investigate that and sort of use that as the basis to understand what crime committing behavior is happening. Because who we catch is only one measure of what's actually going on, and it's actually a poor one. Because the smart criminals never get caught, and as the old joke goes, the smart criminals wear suits and work on Wall Street. But that's, I'm not going to get into that. But at the end of the day, that's the issue, is that it's the racial makeup of the people suffering crime. And by and large, those are African Americans and Hispanic individuals.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's extremely unfortunate as well, because again, it's like we should be defending these people that are the victims of crimes and doing everything we can in order to prosecute and bring proper justice to their perpetrators, and it seems like instead it's like the public narrative is like, we've got to look out for these these poor people that are the perpetrators, because they're just the victims of our society and this racist society. It's like we're jumping through hoops in order to justify bad behavior, and who gets harmed in this? It's the victims of this, and like you said, a lot of times in a lot of these cases, they are minorities in and of themselves. So I just don't understand this mentality that's going on right now.
Yeah, I tangled with the Illinois public defender over this, who said that restitution is not a purpose of the criminal justice system. And I called BS on that, because, you can simplify the criminal justice system in a lot of ways, but it comes down to one thing for victims. I want my stuff back. I want my stuff back. I want my stereo back that you stole. And so that's what it comes down to, is building a system where the victims are confident that they're going to be compensated when something happens to them. To help compensate people, because if we really care about minorities in these oppressed communities, wouldn't it be nice if somebody stole from them, that they got their money back? That if somebody took their weekly paycheck and they couldn't afford to pay for their kids' lunch, that there was some assistance for that. So, we need to completely refocus the system on protecting the communities and the victims, not on necessarily the racial makeup. It is an important factor, because we want to make sure that internal to the system, we're not treating people differently. And then, the overall question of sort of the idea that we have overrepresentation on the front end really is a question of social issues more than it is economics. Because like I said, once you've committed 3 crimes, we can't say that you're innocent anymore. We just can't say that. You are a criminal and you are doing criminal things, and we want to rehabilitate you, and we're going to try all we can. But the presumption of innocence is wilted at that point. And so there are things that we can do, in terms of education. And as Zoper talks about, all the bad outcomes are correlated to zip code. And so we could just say, we're going to get rid of bad zip codes and go in and do something about it. But the criminal justice system can't fix that. Yeah. And so there's only just limits to how, fairer and disparate we're going to see in the criminal justice system as a result of taking society as we find it.
Yeah, it's interesting too that you were talking about restitution, because to me, I find that to be so important, because I remember, and this is more anecdotal, obviously, but I remember when I was in college, I had my car stolen, out of my apartment complex, right? took the car, totally trashed it, gutted it, all that kind of stuff. They ended up catching the guy who ended up doing it, and he went to prison. But I still had to go buy a new car, and it's not like I was made of money as a 19-year-old kid in college and all that kind of stuff. And so it was interesting because I feel like probably one of the more fair ways of doing things would be to figure out a way of having restitution for people where they do have their things either broken or stolen or something along those lines. And it's really interesting too, because, for me as a Christian looking at like Old Testament law, and again, I'm not calling for enforcement of Old Testament law across the board, but it was interesting. One of the principles that they talked about in Leviticus was how in the nation of Israel, if you stole somebody's cow and you got caught, you would have to give back their cow and then also give them one more of yours as well. So there was obviously giving back and then some as well. And there was this mentality of, okay, you took this, now you have to give it back or something equivalent plus more on top of that. And I find that I feel like that would probably be a pretty fair way of, number one, being able to, punish the perpetrators, but then also two, being able to compensate the victims. So that way they're not having to come up with $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, to buy a new car if their car is stolen or whatever it is. And obviously there would have to be, nuance with that and things along those lines. But I think if we could focus a bit more on that from a legislative standpoint, I feel like our society might be a little bit better as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still hacked off that my car was broken into in college and my stereo was stolen, and my deductible is too high, so I ended up having to pay for that. And maybe I'd be on the activist side now if that wouldn't have happened and I wouldn't have gotten my money back. But that's beside the point. And you're right. People are looking at, hey, my window was smashed. Hey, we're allowing people to just do that, and that's just wrong. That's the whole point of why we have this, to stop people from doing damage to our society and to compensate people for that. And so if we don't change the focus and we just say, oh, we feel sorry for this guy, we want to do this and that, the other thing is we can't always expect that these broken people are going to compensate people. So maybe there are situations where we want to put taxpayer money into paying it back. And that's blasphemy at some of these meetings. I get it. The presentation to end criminal fines and fees fell like a lead balloon at a conservative legislative meeting last week. So I know people want criminals to pay. But my point is maybe there are some victims out there where the criminals are never going to pay, like sex assault or other very serious or indigent offenders that we just, as a society, want to compensate for the evils that the criminals have done to them, and they're not going to be covered by insurance.
Yeah, well, and that one, for me as a lifelong, conservative, it's like on one hand, it's like we don't want to add more government, money leaving when we're so far in debt, but then also at the same time, these are serious victims that a lot of times that have had serious harm, and it's affected them in multiple different ways, oftentimes physical, and the result of that can also be financial as well. So like from that standpoint, instead of demanding maybe that the perpetrator pay the victim directly, maybe there could be some way that the government could be the middle road, and that might be a compromise between the left and the right on this one, to where maybe the government is doling out a certain amount of money to them, and then they're going at and enforcing for the perpetrator, themselves, in order to refill that fund to a certain degree. There may be some form of compromise there that maybe we can get both sides, but then again, do both sides ever really want to compromise?
Well, these days you never know, but over in historical times, and having represented a large judicial branch in Colorado for many years, really that was done through fees. We would say we will put on a victim assistance fee, or we'll put on the DUI offender fee, and we'll put that into a fund and try to dole it out. And I think what most lobbyists would tell you in that lobby for crime victims groups or crime survivors groups is that it's not enough. That it does do a little bit, but by and large, we don't put enough money into it. The other thing that we do, though, is that we rely on criminal justice, or we rely on criminal offenders to fund the system itself. And sometimes that causes the system to break down, and that causes us to maybe financially try to hammer them harder than we should because we need the money. And, I look at Indiana's bail system as an example of that, where judges will routinely impose low bails that don't deter criminal behavior, and thus the person doesn't show up or they commit a new crime, because the judges know they'll forfeit the bails anyway, and they get to keep the cash. And so that's, there's perverse financial incentives in the system all the way around that we need to look at. But getting more money for victim restitution is definitely a priority, and you're right. There could be compromise made on this.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now, whenever we have these kinds of conversations, obviously, I think for like a lot of people, they'll feel like, okay, yeah, there's definitely issues here. Like I do not support getting rid of cash bail and things along those lines. But then to a certain degree, a lot of times people feel just helpless. Like, well, what can I do? It's not like I'm a legislator or on the Supreme Court or litigator or something along those lines. So for everyday people that are watching this and like, yeah, I totally agree with what you're talking about. This is a problem. What can they actually do if they find themselves, let's say, in Illinois or another state where they're starting to talk about this and consider this? What can they do to actually make a difference here?
Well, in Illinois, I would say it's going to come down to talking to your legislators. The legislature in Illinois for all time, and I would say maybe for the next 100 years, is going to make the bail system. So they need to hear from you. And if they don't, they're going to continue on. I think this is going to be ripped from the headlines legislation, crime of the week for the next 10 years. In other words, somebody's going to do something outrageous, and it's not going to be on the new crime list for detention. They're going to get out. They're going to do something else that's outrageous, and then legislation will be run to fix that and to allow prosecutors to detain. So that's the sad part. As citizens, don't complicate the bail issue. Don't complicate the criminal justice system issue. As I said, it comes down to two things. We have to catch the offenders and promptly punish them and send that signal throughout the system. And if we're not willing to do that, then we're not going to deter crime. But by and large, what we've learned and what I've learned over the last years of dealing with legislators on criminal justice system issues, the number one thing that sways them is hearing directly from their constituents. In other words, don't write to your neighboring senator. Don't send a letter to all senators. Send a letter to your senator and say, it could be very simple. I don't like this bill. Or guess what? I don't like the direction of the criminal justice policy we're going, and I'm very concerned about crime. Polls can only do so much, but when they hear directly from you, it moves the needle. The other thing that really moves the needle is when you show up to a campaign fundraiser and you say, I'm upset about crime, hear about my issue, hear about what happened, and hear about how the system didn't hold it accountable. So, it's probably almost cliche to say this is a democracy, but it is. And that's what it's going to take for the needle to be moved. And guess what? The other thing is Democrats need to come out. And I have a lot of friends that are Democrats, but they're hacked off about this crime issue. They need to say, hey, listen, holding criminals accountable for the crimes they commit and make sure victims get restitution fits within the umbrella of the Democratic Party and fits within the penumbra of a free society. And it's going to take courage for them to do that and fight off the activists on the left who say, if you believe in the criminal justice system, you're racist. But it's time.
Oh yeah. It was really interesting because I went to a grassroots RFK organization meeting out here in Southern California, and that was one of the things that kept coming up from a lot of lifelong Democrats. I was the only Republican in the entire room, and one of the things that they kept bringing up was the corruption and the crime that's going on. Specifically out here in the state of California, but like, at what point are Democrats going to realize this is not the path that we need to be heading down? So I think some people are starting to wake up. It's just we need more people talking about this and that sort of thing. So if people do want more information, they want to check out American Bail Coalition, more from you, or if they had questions, where do they go for that?
AmericanBailCoalition.org, or find us on Facebook and Twitter. And as you said, a little less talk and a lot more action is what we need.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, Jeffrey, I really appreciate you coming on. It's definitely an interesting topic and one that I think needs to be had more. And I don't think enough people are talking about this. So I appreciate you coming on and educating us on all this stuff and what's actually going on here.
Well, I could talk about it all day. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and then everybody else as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I will post the link to the American Bail Coalition in the show notes. That way you guys can just click on that, go right